Michael McCann, legal analyst from Sports Illustrated and SI.com. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing well, Rich. How about yourself?
I'm doing fine. Let's start with what happened yesterday with Ezekiel Elliott. Explain to everybody what is happening on the legal front right now in real time at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. What do you have for me here?
Sure. So right now, Judge Mazan, a Texas federal judge, is reviewing whether or not to grant a temporary restraining order for Elliott. Judge Mazan's clerk's office has said that we'll get a decision by Friday. If it's granted, that would restrain the NFL from imposing the 6-game suspension for a limited period of time, probably about 2 weeks. Then there would be an additional hearing to see if it can be extended. And if he declines to invoke the temporary restraining order, that would be a huge defeat for Elliott. It would be hard for him to come back from that.
Okay, and so what would be the legal standing that the players is it the Players Association that is in front of this judge, or is it Ezekiel Elliott's personal lawyers, the Cowboys? Who's actually leading this case? Jeffrey Kessler?
Yeah, so Kessler is involved. His firm, Winston Strawn, is involved. It's really both, like in Tom Brady case where the lawyers, where the player has his own legal team, as well as lawyers from the Players Association. They sort of collaborate. And Kessler, I imagine, is the quarterback, if you will, of this particular case.
Okay. And so what's the legal standing that they're proffering to the judge to say this is why they should rule in Ezekiel Elliott's favor?
So the lawyers for Elliott are basically saying, look, unless you grant a temporary restraining order, he's going to suffer irreparable harm. And that harm is he's going to be disassociated from his team. His team is going to suffer. He's not going to be able to accumulate statistics and other things that will advance his career. They're also arguing that it's essential that he continue to play because they believe they have a high likelihood of success that Judge Mazan will ultimately vacate what has now become Harold Henderson's arbitration award against Elliott. So they have to show, it's kind of a hard burden, they have to show 4 different prongs, and 2 of them I just described, and very basically they have to convince the judge that he's likely going to rule in favor of Elliott down the line, and it's a challenging argument to make.
Okay, Michael McCann of Sports Illustrated joining us here on the Rich Eisen Show. Then let's rewind this a little bit then. In the fact that Ezekiel Elliott can play this week, it is very confusing to a lot of people how a suspension can get upheld and then the NFL agrees to the fact that he gets to play in week 1. Why would the NFL do that?
Well, the NFL has issued a statement that basically says because the decision of Harold Henderson wasn't made before Elliott went to court yesterday, it's essential for fairness that Elliott not be suspended for this first week's games. It's certainly not required. I think what's going on here is the NFL is mindful of appearance and mindful of the fact that they want to seem fair and reasonable right as Judge Mazan is deciding whether or not to rule in favor of Elliott or the NFL. I think timing matters here. If this case wasn't in court, I don't know if the NFL would be so generous. I think, frankly, that the NFL is thinking about impact on the judge, and they're also thinking about other judges could get involved in this litigation. The NFL is trying to move it to New York. Even if it stays in Texas, there could be appellate judges. So the NFL is certainly looking at the optics of what they do in terms of how judges are reacting to it.
Before we get to the New York of it all, so you're saying that if Harold Henderson had made his ruling before that hearing started, the NFL might not have offered Ezekiel Elliott the week 1 helmet?
Possibly, because the argument would be that Elliott wouldn't have been prejudiced in that hearing because he didn't know what Henderson was going to do. If he knew, then there would have been less harm on Elliott going into that hearing.
Well, why wouldn't the New York Giants be hopping mad right now, Michael, and the fact that not only is Ezekiel Elliott going to suit up against them, but the league says to a judge it's too late in the week to just sit here and tell him he can't play week 1 when Odell Beckham Jr. was told on a Wednesday once upon a time he couldn't play in a game.
Yeah, it's hard to reconcile those two things, and I think the Giants would have a valid argument in terms of logic. The NFL would probably respond saying this is a little bit different because it's now in the legal system. And secondarily, it's the league's discretion. The league doesn't really have to be consistent by rule. It would be better if they were, but they're not obligated to.
So why won't this just wind up in the same way that it wound up with Tom Brady, Michael, and the fact that the Players Association can tell as many judges as it wants that what the league did was arbitrary, it's not fair, that the league is just rubber stamping a decision that they decided to come up with because they want to look tough on domestic violence. And then it's the judge just reads the fine print of the collective bargaining agreement and says the league could do what it wants because you signed this CBA. Why won't it wind up that way?
It probably will. That's the most likely outcome if we go by the Brady decision, if we go by the Adrian Peterson decision. Ultimately, the judges looked at the contract and said what you just said, Rich, which is the fact is the NFL can more or less do what it wants with player conduct. It doesn't have to be consistent. It doesn't have to share investigative notes. It doesn't have to have witnesses testify. There's nothing in Article 46 of the CBA that mandates any of those things happening. And the argument the NFL would say, in court at least, is if it's so important to the players and their union, why didn't they negotiate for those things? Now, other judges, it's worth noting, have looked at this differently. Remember, two of the judges that Brady had ruled in his favor.
Judge Berman, right?
Right, Judge Berman. That's exactly right. And Chief Judge Katzmann of the Second Circuit ruled in his favor. Now, they weren't in the majority, but they say, wait a second, you can't just say if it's not in the agreement, it doesn't exist. There are certain basic elements of fairness. We don't know what Judge Mazant's going to say. Maybe he's in that school, maybe he's in the other. We'll find out.
Okay. So why New York? Why is the league filing in New York, Michael McCann?
There's no better jurisdiction for the NFL than New York because of Tom Brady. Because they beat Tom Brady, that's now binding precedent in New York. If this case winds up in New York, I don't see a pathway for Elliott to win because the judge is going to be obligated, even a sympathetic judge is going to be obligated to say the Tom Brady decision makes it clear unless there are procedural safeguards actually stated in Article 46, they don't exist.
Okay. So handicap it for me, I guess, to wrap it all up, Michael. Handicap this. What do you think is going to happen?
I think most likely by the end, Elliott loses, but it's hard to read what Judge Mazant's going to do. Clearly during the hearing, based on the reporting, he was troubled by what happened in the NFL's investigation of Elliott. I don't think it's beyond the realm of possibility that he could issue a restraining order, but I don't think at the end Elliott will prevail just because Article 46 is so disadvantageous for players. Even if Elliott gets another couple weeks without a suspension, I think ultimately he'll serve it. So
you're saying most likely scenario he misses weeks 4 through 10? Is that what you're saying?
That or 2 through 8. I mean, I think that if he gets any win, it's probably going to be at this initial threshold because the judge could say, I have some concerns. I need to take more time to evaluate this. Let's basically put things on hold for a couple weeks with a restraining order. But I don't think that's the likely outcome, Rich. I think the likely outcome is that the judge probably denies the temporary restraining order. But I don't want to say that with conviction because ultimately it's really up to the judge and he has the discretion.
And then what do you think Jerry Jones does about this? Do you think that he's going to – because I know if you remember, Bob Kraft had a moment where he thought maybe he should continue to fight Tom Brady and perhaps sue the league and thought differently. But Jerry – with all honesty, he's got his bust in his jacket already in Canton. I'm wondering what you think Jerry Jones' remedies might be. You know, the truth is, Rich, the law is stacked against owners suing the league. The fact is owners agree to the commissioner having final authority on player discipline and also on team discipline. I don't see a valid or realistic pathway for Jerry Jones to go to court trying to take on the NFL. I realize he sued the NFL before, back in the 90s. Yep. That was over a totally different thing. That was really about intellectual property, who has the right to decide an exclusive licensing deal. That has nothing to do with this. This is about player conduct. If Jones goes to court, I don't think he will, and if he does, I don't think it would go anywhere. Okay. Do you have any 2 cents on what happened with the Red Sox and the Yankees, Michael, before I let you go? Anything? Well, look, we know there's a long history of this type of in-baseball espionage, if you will, using telescopes, binoculars, cameras. This is sort of the latest innovation of it, using an Apple phone. I don't know if it's any worse than what's happened in the past. It's interesting that teams haven't been punished before. That doesn't mean the Red Sox shouldn't be punished, but certainly it's a relevant fact that this has occurred with some history without any kind of discipline. But it looks like this time Rob Manfred maybe wants to send a message, and he might make an example out of the Red Sox. And is there any precedence for the commissioner, based you can tell, and rules and any Anything in the rule book that he can lean on in the past about what he would do?
He can lean on the best interest of the game clause. That's always the catch-all clause that the baseball commissioner has to say, look, it's against the best interest of baseball to have what amounts to cheating. Now, the Red Sox would say, well, why have neither you nor any other commissioner used it over 100 years? And that's a fair point. But the commissioner could decide that this is an opportunity to basically create new law, if you will, and make an example of the Red Sox.
And I do have to, before I let you go, you still have that class on Deflategate?
Not only, Rich, do I have that class on Deflategate, but in fact, enrollment is up this fall. Enrollment is up.
What do you mean? What do you mean enrollment's up?
Hey, we got more students than last year. I mean, I was thinking people are going to get sick of Deflategate. They can't get enough of it.
So then ask him the poll question, Brockman. We have to ask a professor at the University of New Hampshire School of Law who's teaching a class on Deflategate the poll question before we let him go.
Sure, Michael. What's the worst Boston sports scandal? Spygate, Deflategate, Watchgate, none of the above.
What do you got for me?
Well, I think Spygate might be the worst because we know that the team was at fault. And with Deflategate, there's a lot of evidence which suggests the Patriots, if they did it, there's conflicting evidence. Certainly, there's no neutral scientist that we know of that has supported the NFL, and there are a whole bunch that have said the NFL is wrong. I guess with Watchgate, it kind of has a frivolous quality to it, so I don't want to make it number one, particularly because other teams have done that. So I think Spygate, to me, is the worst one because it was an infraction, and the Patriots acknowledged they made a mistake. That, to me, I feel best about that one because we know it actually occurred.
Thank you, Michael. Always enjoy our chats.
Thank you.
That's Michael McCann at McCann Sports Law.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on radio stations across the country and audience.
If you like that, please download our app. There's lots of fun things there other than just more of the videos you just saw. You can call us from the app. You can email us from the app. Just download it. Trust me, you'll enjoy it.